think anybody's ever called me a luminary before. So, here's the story. Elliot and I first met Jim and Barrett in March of 1969, over 44 years ago. We had just returned from Mississippi in November of '68, where Elliot had been a staff attorney with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights in their Jackson office. Elliot received a call from a much-beloved partner at Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, Lou Oberdorfer. Lou was the Lawyers Committee co-chair that year and got it in his head that this young attorney in the firm needed to go to Mississippi to become the staff director of the Jackson office. Jim and his wife, Barrett, had a young family, and while the work was important, exciting, and God knows, fun, they seemed a little reluctant to uproot their family and transplant their young children to a somewhat hostile cultural environment. As Lou laid out our job, it was to accompany Jim and Barrett to Mississippi and convince them that living in Jackson was entirely doable, important, safe, and fun. We must have been a smash success because the Robertsons did indeed decide to move to Jackson for the Lawyers Committee's leadership role, and the rest is history. Elliot and I have been blessed to get to know Jim over these many decades. He is a man of remarkable talent, a first-rate legal mind, superb judgment, and a deep commitment to social justice. Jim graduated from GW Law School in '65, entered private practice at Wilmer, and at the time, Wilmer was just a tiny firm. Nevertheless, his colleague David Chambers says that somehow Wilmer managed to find an office for them 4 floors away from everybody else that they had named Siberia. As Jim recalled, Jim loved the firm, he loved to strategize, he loved the law. His devotion to Wilmer notwithstanding, as I suggested a minute ago, the civil rights battles that were being fought on the streets of Montgomery, Selma, and Jackson drew him to that Lawyers Committee leadership job. Jim says his years in Jackson became a defining period in his life. In Mississippi, Jim participated in or oversaw matters that were critical to the civil rights struggle: litigation to equalize municipal services in communities of color, litigation to declare unlawful charitable tax deductions to segregated academies, challenges to the underrepresentation of African Americans on the Safe Streets Act Planning Agency, their exclusion from membership on the selective service panels, and so much more. But perhaps the most notable case during Jim's tenure was the NAACP versus Clybourne Hardware. Charles Evers, Medgar's brother, returned from Chicago to Clarksdale, Mississippi to continue his fight following Medgar's death. In '68, Charles, then the Mississippi Field Secretary of the NAA, led a boycott against Clybourne and other merchants, during which he used fiery language to, quote unquote, strongly urge customers not to break the boycott. 17 merchants, including Clybourne, sued the NAA and others to recover losses caused by the boycott. The case was tried beginning in '73, and a verdict was issued in '76, which awarded Clybourne Hardware and others a judgment of $1.25 million. A judgment that was large enough to shake the very foundation of the NAA. The decision was upheld by the Supreme Court of Mississippi and appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. By that time, Jim was back at Wilmer. The Lawyers Committee asked the firm to take the case, and they agreed. Jim played a critical role in its preparation. He used the case to mentor young lawyers and to inculcate in them the importance of civil rights advocacy. He worked closely on developing arguments with John Payton, a leading civil rights lawyer, until his untimely death just last year. In '82, the Supreme Court, in a decision written by Justice Stevens, overturned the appellate court, literally saving the NAACP from fiscal extinction. Jim went on to serve with distinction as a U.S. District Court judge for the District of Columbia for more than 15 years. And he retired just 3 years ago in June of 2010. Our dear friend Bill Robinson said it best. Jim is a self-effacing guy. He is an unsung hero of the movement. I'm going to end with a quote from a wonderful letter written by retired Mississippi State Supreme Court Justice and dear friend of Jim's, Justice Jimmy Robertson, who wrote in this beautiful letter to Jim, and I quote, "We should leave this day determined to find ways to enable the generation now bearing the torch that some selflessness is good for the soul, that each generation past and present has had no choice but to wager its salvation upon some prophecy based on imperfect knowledge, not only following Holmes and sounding a note of daring hope and will, but acting out that note, ever aware of the practical reality that opportunity is not a frequent visitor." As he concluded in his letter, "I'd hoped to be with you today. Alas, a brief Jew, in a particular, this is my own aside, a wonderful Mississippi phrase, Jimmy Robinson says, but due to a client whose ox is in the ditch, with apologies to the poets, I send this greeting, and my son Lamar, who's my surrogate." I think Lamar is in the audience, and there he is. And this letter concludes, "Jim, thank you for your kindness and your service and for lighting the way. I bring you our honoree, retired Judge Jim Robertson."